Hello everyone, my name's Emma Rooke from the Livestock Biosecurity Network. I'm a vet and the organisation I work for is an organisation to raise awareness about biosecurity for grazing animals and to prepare those industries for emergency animal disease outbreaks. Today we're going to talk about biosecurity for events involving horses, and so I'm going to introduce about what biosecurity is, the reason biosecurity is so important, and then some tips for people running horse events on how they can manage biosecurity. So basically biosecurity are the steps you can take to reduce the chance of introduction, establishment and spread of pests and diseases. And the reason we do this is to protect our animals, our industry, our economy or our business, and our environment from the impacts of these pests and diseases. The impacts of pests and diseases or disease outbreaks are around the cost of treatment of these outbreaks, but also potentially, the time that our animals aren't in work can cost us as well. On top of that, often these diseases impact on the welfare of our animals, either in the short term or sometimes even in the long term, with long-term impacts on their overall well-being or health. And if we're in business, some of these diseases can also affect our reputation in the industry. So some of the diseases that we might be thinking about protecting our horses from are respiratory diseases, strangles, equine herpes virus, salmonella and other diarrheas, things like worms, so intestinal worms and parasites, but also things like weeds, which can impact on our pastures and also cause a risk of toxic plants to our animals. And there's also other diseases we might not know much about, and good biosecurity practices will protect us from these as well. So we know that things like Hendra virus have emerged over the last few years, and also mosquito-borne diseases like the flaviviruses. We don't know much about these diseases. We're learning all the time, but good biosecurity practices can help protect us from these sorts of emerging diseases as well. So basically, prevention is better than the cure. So good biosecurity practices will help us prevent the spread of these diseases. Diseases can be spread in different ways, and we need to keep this in mind when we're thinking about a biosecurity plan for a horse event. So biosecurity diseases can be spread directly from horse to horse, so direct contact, but also on people's hands and clothing and shoes, on vehicles and equipment, through shared feed and water sources, and sometimes even through the air or through biting insects and wildlife. Things like rats and mice, and as we know with the Hendra virus, bats are a vector for that disease. So places where animals congregate, like horse events, are really great places for disease to spread. And not only are there lots of opportunities to contact horses of unknown health status, but animals are often excited and stressed from transport, and they're in a new location, and this can temporarily reduce their immune system and make them more susceptible to picking up disease. So by events, we're talking about any gathering of horses, so that includes things like pony clubs, social rides, events, gatherings on private property, but also mixed species events like country shows. And so when you're thinking about biosecurity planning as an event planner, your objectives are to prevent the introduction of diseases to these events. But if you do have a sick animal, how are you going to manage that? You want to prevent the spread of disease within an event if a disease event does occur. And the most effective way to do this is to have a plan. So when thinking about biosecurity planning, it's helpful to think about 4 key areas. And the 4 key components of biosecurity are thinking about people, including training those people, thinking about horses and other animals that might be around or in and around the event, thinking about venue design and management, and also administrative and record keeping. So first of all, who's going to take charge? So someone needs to be in charge of biosecurity for an event. They need to be a nominated person or an appointed person who's going to be responsible for biosecurity right throughout the event. And this might not be the event, the main event organiser, but it does need to be someone who knows about biosecurity and understands the risks and understands how to manage biosecurity in these events. So those people are going to be responsible for making sure that the plan that's been developed before the event is implemented on the day. But it's not a one-person job. Biosecurity is everyone's responsibility, and so they may have people, support people who help them achieve this good biosecurity, and they'll also have people on the end of the phone that they can use as resource people should there be any concerns on the day. So it's really handy to have a contacts list, and that should be with the biosecurity person or with the event organiser. So just some examples here of who you might want to have the phone number handy. So your local vet obviously is a good one, and letting them know the event's on and letting them know that or having them agree to be on the end of the phone in case there's an issue. If it's a big event or it's a requirement, there may be a vet on site. Other useful phone numbers are people who manage, if you have a death or an animal's euthanized, someone who can manage that disposal or at least take that animal off site. Also, if there is something unusual and you're not sure what you're dealing with, or you think you have an emergency animal disease, then having the local government animal health or veterinary officer's number on hand is really helpful too. I think another important thing is to let the neighbours know what's going on. So if the venue is not usually used for gatherings of horses, then just letting the neighbours know so that they can think about how that might impact on them and maybe move their horses away from their boundaries so that the risk of spread of potential disease is reduced. So here's some specific activities which could help reduce the chance of spread or spread of disease during an event. One of the key things is to minimise horse-to-horse contact, but also people contacting lots of horses. So, for example, if you are handling a horse and then you go and sort of handle another horse, there's a really high chance of disease spread from the initial horse if it's sick to the other horse that you handle. So it's one of the best ways to manage that is actually to minimise, horse contact and just have the owners of that horse managing that horse and not having heaps of different people handling lots of different horses. In addition, like often these events, there'll be public or non-riding members of the public there, and it's common obviously for people to want to touch the horses, and there's a few ways you can manage that. You can either restrict public access to the horses altogether, or if you do, people do choose to have the public touch their horses, then it's really important to have hand sanitising equipment available for cleaning hands and that sort of thing. I think the important part with the people aspect of biosecurity is that it's really important that everyone sort of knows what's going on. So it's all very well for the committee to know what's going on and maybe the biosecurity officer, but if you haven't trained your volunteers, or if other sectors of the sort of horse community don't understand why you're doing these things, then it's going to be more difficult to implement. So I think training is really important. And you could do that through, newsletters. So Horse SA is very active in this area, and raising awareness with your members, or have a flyer that goes out with the registration form, so that there's a little bit of information for people before they come to the event about the expectations, biosecurity expectations. But also you could even run short sessions during the event, maybe 20 minutes, just to explain the biosecurity procedures and why they're important and what's going to happen, what your expectations are on that day. So horses obviously are the focus of these events. We all, love our horses and we want to keep them healthy. So the easiest way to prevent spread of disease in a horse event is to make sure that sick horses don't get to an event. And there's a few ways you can do that. Obviously, if your horse society or your event may have rules around this, that your horse must be vaccinated for certain things, up to date with sort of animal management procedures like worming, but also it's really good discipline for people to sit down the day of an event and actually go through a horse health declaration, just to remind themselves, okay, is my horse okay today? Has it been well? Is it showing any signs of snuffles, or has it been off its food at all? And really those sorts of horses, we want to keep them at home, because even if they might not be full-blown sick, they could still be infectious to other horses, just like us with the flu. Often we're infectious a couple of days beforehand. So if animals are off colour or not feeling well, then they really should be left at home. So if you have got animals coming onto a property, or horses coming onto a property where there are already resident animals, it's important to separate those resident animals from visiting animals, and that can be just as simple as moving them to the sort of back paddock or something like that. But it doesn't just include horses. It could include other livestock, but also dogs are a potential biosecurity threat in a horse event too. So where dogs are free roaming, they could be getting into this and that, and then they potentially could have disease on their coat, or be picking things up and moving them around the venue. So it's important either that dogs, if dogs are present, that they're on a lead or tied up and not roaming around the event. I think the key spread of some of these diseases is horse-to-horse contact. So again, separating your horse from other horses at the event if possible, and really limiting the contact of horses even at and during the event. And we'll go into a bit more of that in the next section. Okay, so this is probably one of the more challenging areas, venue design and management. Often venues aren't designed for biosecurity, so it means that your biosecurity management becomes even more important. So particularly where you've got infrastructure already existing, like at showgrounds, you need to think about how you're going to best use the facilities that are already there to manage any biosecurity risks. Where you've got less infrastructure, you probably have a bit more flexibility in separating horses and having making the venue a bit more like you want it. But the sorts of things you need to think about are sort of stabling areas, washdown areas, and any areas where animals are sort of potentially coming together, so warm-up areas and that sort of thing. So you might want to consider the stabling areas and what sort of ability that gives you to keep horses separate. You might want to think about what sort of, or the cleanliness of the facilities. So if the facilities are used regularly, then were they cleaned before or after the last person used them? It wouldn't hurt to even just clean and disinfect stables before your event to make sure that there's no risk there from previous events. You need to think about things like manure management, so making sure manure is managed away from the animals that are visiting, and also in a place where you can monitor for things like weed seeds and that sort of thing. You might want to think about traffic control, so where vehicles are moving, but also foot traffic, so really reducing vehicle and foot traffic around the animals, and you know, you might want to use signage to help with that. And then I think you know, the next is, so what if an animal gets sick? How are you going to manage that animal? And the key management tool for sick or preventing spread of sick animals is to isolate them from the well animals. So you need to think about, if an animal gets sick, there are two options. One is to send the animal home if it's well enough to travel, and that would obviously reduce the risk significantly because the animal won't be at the ground anymore. But also, if you have an animal that can't travel, you need some sort of area that's separate from the other horses. And it doesn't have to be fancy, it just needs to be at least 50 metres away from other horses. And again, you need to be thinking about how you're going to access veterinary support for those animals. It's also handy to have a biosecurity kit on site, and they can just have some basic personal protection gear like gloves and a mask, but also disinfectants and you know, brushes and boots and that sort of thing, so that when you are handling the sick horse, you're not then inadvertently spreading it to well horses. Okay, and the paperwork. So administration and record keeping is probably one of the areas most people aren't that strong at, because we all actually want to spend time with our horses, not sitting at a desk, but actually this is the stuff that really keeps us on track. So I think the first point is, you know, it's really important to have a plan. So it's really hard to manage a big or potentially complex issue like biosecurity without a plan, but with a plan it becomes actually very, very simple. So develop a plan, and there's some resources at the end of this presentation you can use to do that, and practice it. So you might practice it on small events, or you might practice it in real time, but every time you use it you'll be practicing it, and then you'll need to update it with things that you know, maybe things that didn't work well, or you get more sophisticated in your understanding of biosecurity, therefore you can, you know, tailor your plan to your level of understanding of biosecurity of your group. Record keeping is really important, and again, you know, this person who's in charge of biosecurity needs to, you know, make sure that there's people to help support that record keeping, and the key things really are to record who came to an event and what their property identification code is. So in South Australia, every property which has more than one horse or more on it needs to have a property identification code, and the use of that is to help manage emergency situations, so everything from sort of animal disease, but also fire and potentially flood and other natural disasters. So a property identification code will help identify where animals have come from should there be an outbreak of disease identified after the event, and then in that case it's easy to track back who was at the event and which horses were potentially exposed, which means it's much quicker to get an event under control instead of kind of chasing your tail looking for trying to catch the disease after it's already spread. So that record keeping, it needs to be in a format that's easy to read and also that's easy to sort of access should you need to you know, provide that to someone who's doing some tracing in an event of an outbreak. And I suppose thinking about who's going to do it comes back to this sort of training thing. It's really important that, you know, people who are doing this sort of record keeping understand the importance of it, and so they're not leaving information out because they don't understand the importance of it. So making sure everyone's trained, and that's not just the committee, that's volunteers, and also, you know, that broader understanding of your membership on, you know, what, why are we collecting this information? It's not just because we want to slow you down. It's because, you know, it's because it's protecting our industry and protecting our ability to have, you know, events like this into the future. So the next thing to think about is what are you going to do in, you know, the case there is a sick horse, and you know, what does a sick horse look like? So basically, any signs of illness should be taken seriously by horse owners and event organisers at a horse event. So, you know, a horse that's looking lethargic, a horse that's having trouble breathing, a horse that's salivating excessively, or a horse that's showing nervous signs such as, you know, trouble with its, maybe it's stumbling, or if, you know, a horse has any sort of excessive diarrhea, then, you know, those sorts of things should all be considered, that that horse should be isolated from other horses at the event. And also, as we know, horse diseases like Hendra can show up many different kinds of ways, and so it's important to treat that horse as if it, you know, might be infectious to other horses, and also think about your own personal protection when dealing with horses like that. Hopefully, most sick horses are not going to have a nasty infectious horse disease, but I think if we kind of take the precautions that might be the case, then you know, you're preventing disease spread, whether it is a sort of a common horse disease or one of these unusual, or, you know, sort of emerging diseases. So just, I suppose it's a responsibility of horse owners to know their horse's normal behaviour and how they behave normally in a sort of social event like a horse event. But also as you as an event organiser to sort of have protocols in place to manage a situation should a horse get sick. If you can send a horse home, that's great. If the horse is too sick to travel, then you're going to have to think about who you call. So that list of people we talked about at the beginning, so your local vet that's on call. If you can't get hold of a local vet, and especially if more than one animal is affected, you might need to consider calling the local animal health or veterinary officer for your area. So if there is a sick horse on site, your vet or your animal health officer will probably need a little bit of background so they can help you work out what the best course of action to take is. So you probably need to know a little bit about the horse, how old it is, if it's had contact with other sick horses, what other animals it's been in contact with, what clinical signs it's showing, and how long they've been, the clinical signs have been obvious. That might be a sensitive issue, because some people might feel that they don't want to tell you that they knew the horse was sick before it came to the event, so there might be a little bit of sensitivity required around that. Don't forget that you're working with the owner, so we really need the owner to help us, you know, get this information. So it's not a matter of you know, blaming anyone. It's really just trying to, you know, find out as much information as we can so that we can you know, take the best action and get the best outcome. So so there's a list of bits and pieces there, but really looking at like a little bit of information about the horse, what its history has been, has it travelled, have travelling horses come back onto the property recently, how long has the animal been sick, what sort of signs is it showing, and are other animals sick? That's another really key one. Just as an aside, just be aware when you're travelling interstate that you can't move certain things across borders, particularly things like feed and soil. So if you are taking feed with you, that's fine, but you may not be able to bring it back across the border, because you know, border biosecurity officers won't know whether it's from the state like South Australia and it's gone out and come in again, or whether it's actually from another state. So just be aware of those sorts of things when you're travelling. And lastly, just some resources here. Biosecurity SA has some information on sort of general health and biosecurity. Farm biosecurity website's really good for resources for setting up on-farm or venue biosecurity plans, and there's one specifically for horses. So have a look in there, and it also has some tools for and some tips for thinking about biosecurity more holistically, and then more specifically at events. Animal Health Australia has a little background on the framework of where biosecurity sits in sort of a national, international context. And Livestock Biosecurity Network has some information on, again, on farm biosecurity planning. One of the best resources here for horse owners in South Australia is the Horse SA website, and they've got a page on biosecurity, and it has a whole lot of resources there for you. So that's a summary, just a very quick summary of some things to think of when you're having your next horse event. If you need any support, Horse SA and Livestock Biosecurity Network can give you a bit of guidance, and also your local animal health officer or veterinary officer at your local Biosecurity SA office. So thanks for listening, and good luck with your next horse event. Cheers.